Apostasy, the falling away in the last times. Part 3, 2 Peter 2, 1-22. Key verse, by covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words. Verses 1-3.
But there were also false prophets among the people, even as there will be false teachers among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the Lord who bought them, and bring on themselves swift destruction. And many will follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth will be blasphemed. By covetousness they will exploit you with deceptive words. For a long time their judgment has not been idle, and their destruction does not slumber.
How this applies to us today. This passage addresses the problem of the coming false teachers. Peter reminds us that as there were false prophets, there will be false teachers among us. To a large degree, this issue is ignored by most of the modern churches, and that probably happens because of false teachers in those churches. They will secretly bring in destructive heresies. This is very serious because their end is destruction. How this applies to us today. By covetousness, they will exploit you with deceptive words. Today there are many televangelists and pastors of big churches who make fortunes off of gullible people. Continuing with verses 4-11.
For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but saved Noah, one of 8 people, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood on the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them to destruction, making them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. For that righteous man, dwelling among them, tormented his righteous soul from day to day by seeing and hearing their lawless deeds. Then the Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptations, and to reserve the unjust under punishment for the day of judgment, and especially those who walk according to the flesh in the lust of uncleanness and despise authority. They are presumptuous, self-willed. They are not afraid to speak evil of dignitaries, whereas angels, who are greater in power and might, do not bring a reviling accusation against them before the Lord.
How this applies to us today. In this passage, Peter cites examples of God's judgment of sin. God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. This refers to Lucifer's rebellion against God, found in Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. Lucifer, along with 1/3 of the angels, was cast down to the earth. Peter then reminds us of God's judgment of the world of the ungodly with the flood. He then cites the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah, and that God made them an example to those who afterward would live ungodly. He describes how God delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. This shows us how God is able to deliver the righteous from temptation. Peter says that the ungodly are presumptuous, self-willed, and are not afraid to speak evil of dignitaries. We must be very careful of how we speak about those in authority. Continuing with verses 12-17.
But these, like natural brute beasts made to be caught and destroyed, speak evil of the things they do not understand, and will utterly perish in their own corruption, and will receive the wages of unrighteousness, as those who count it pleasure to carouse in the daytime. They are spots and blemishes, carousing in their own deceptions while they feast with you, having eyes full of adultery, and that cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls. They have a heart trained in covetous practices, and are accursed children. They have forsaken the right way and gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. But he was rebuked for his iniquity. A dumb donkey speaking with a man's voice restrained the madness of the prophet. These are wells without water, clouds carried by a tempest, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever.
How this applies to us today. In this passage, Peter paints a very bleak picture of these false teachers. Peter says that they are like natural brute beasts made to be caught and destroyed. They speak evil of the things they do not understand and will utterly perish in their own corruption. They will receive the wages of unrighteousness. They count it pleasure to carouse in the daytime. These false teachers like to feast with believers, but are carousing or flirting in their own deception. They have eyes full of adultery that cannot cease from sin. These false teachers entice unstable people. These apostates have hearts trained in covetous practices. They have forsaken the right way and gone astray. These false teachers are those who will be in the blackness of darkness forever. We must be on guard against the wiles of false teachers. Continuing with verses 18 through 22.
For when they speak great swelling words of emptiness, they allure through the lusts of the flesh, through lewdness, the ones who have actually escaped from those who live in error. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption. For by whom a person is overcome, by him also he is brought into bondage. For if after they have escaped the pollutions of the world through the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, they are again entangled in them and overcome, the latter end is worse for them than the beginning. For it would have been better for them not to have known the way of righteousness, than having known it, to turn from the holy commandment delivered to them. But it has happened to them according to the true proverb, a dog returns to his own vomit, and a sow, having washed, to her wallowing in the mire.
How this applies to us today. Peter continues his discussion about these false teachers. They speak great swelling words of emptiness. They allure through the lusts of the flesh. While they promise them liberty, they themselves are slaves of corruption. He says of those who have escaped the pollutions of the world and are again entangled, their latter end is worse for them than the beginning. A person can become a believer and later turn back. Peter quotes the true proverb, a dog returns to its own vomit, and a sow, having washed, to her wallowing in the mire. We must be on guard against the wiles of false teachers. Apostasy, the falling away in the last times. The next part of this study is 1 John 2. It is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come.